Thank you, Anne. I'd like to start with some thanks. In particular, University of Limerick. The PES department has been incredibly welcoming, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate PE PAYS in particular for hosting me here to be able to talk with you today. In particular, Mary O'Sullivan and Deborah Tannehill and Ann McPhail, Missy Parker and others were instrumental in me being here and me coming here, so I do appreciate all of their efforts, and they have make me felt welcomed since I've been here. I'd also like to thank Fulbright Commission of Ireland and the United States for their support, without which I certainly wouldn't be here. A little bit more about who I am, and I have been promoted. I'm an associate professor now. That's quite all right. I come from California State University, Chico, and I know Daniel has ties to Chico. But I am first, and Chico is actually part of a large university system. There's 23 state university systems in California, and this Chico is one of those 23. And first and foremost, a teacher-educator. I teach both in the undergraduate and graduate programs in teacher education, and I also coordinate our graduate master's degree program in kinesiology. As Anne mentioned, a lot of my research interests revolve around learning and how people learn to do the jobs that they do. So, in particular, teachers and teacher educators, professional development and professional learning, school-university partnerships, as well as initial teacher education. In case you might be interested about my institution, we have a similar enrollment, I believe, than to what UL has here at about 17,000 students. Pretty diverse student population, although the majority of our students do come from within the state of California. Located about 90 miles north of Sacramento, which is our state capital, and it's about a 3-hour drive from San Francisco. And as Daniel can attest to, very different from Southern California, which is what most people think of California. Northern California has its own unique culture. Daniel, have you seen our new building?
Only from the outside.
Okay, we're pretty proud of our new building. So today, what I'd like to talk to you about is professional development. There's been a growing literature base that really has given us some insight in terms of what is quality professional development, and in particular a growing number of studies within physical education. And that's primarily what I'd like to focus on today. I'm going to start with talking about what is professional development, what constitutes professional development, why traditional forms of professional development are failing our teachers, and I'll talk what I mean by in terms of traditional. What are the core features of effective professional development, and some practical examples of what it might look like in practice. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is achieved by this type of professional development. But before I do that, I'd like to involve you for just a moment. I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to think a bit about how you learn best. And I want you to focus on a couple of questions. So I know we have teacher educators, we have people from a variety of different areas here, but I'd like you to focus on 3 things. First, of the most impactful learning experience for you, okay, what made that experience effective? And ultimately, what did you do, or how did you think differently as a result of that learning experience? It could be an event, it could be a person, anything that you want. Take just 1 minute and talk to the person next to you. Yes. 30 seconds.
What did you
Okay. Let me interrupt your conversations there, if I might. I hate to interrupt social interaction, okay? But if you were to identify a couple of words, or a single word or a couple of words that would sum up those learning experiences, what might you say of your conversation? What are some words that might describe those learning experiences? Mary, what were you? Collegial. Okay.
Emery said ongoing.
Ongoing. People. Social. Okay. What's that? Results. Okay. Fantastic, fantastic. A lot of those things that you mentioned are exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. And they're what reflect effective professional development. What research tells us is effective professional development. So let me continue by asking you just a few additional questions about your experience. You don't have to respond to these, just think about them. Okay? So did that learning experience encourage you to ask questions? Did it allow you to make connections with what you already know and are good at? Did it help you to discriminate as to what is important to know and do? Did it help you share knowledge and learn from and with others? I heard that many times throughout, the social nature. Did it make you feel comfortable with and deal with uncertainty? And finally, did it provide opportunities to exercise leadership? Okay, so I want to talk more about those learning experiences. And as I do, think about your own learning experience and how does that relate to what the literature tells us. I have a few pictures here. You may recognize some of these folks. I warned some of you that there were going to be some images. Based on these images, what are some words that would come to mind in terms of what you see? These are teachers engaged in professional development and professional learning. Interaction. Collaboration. What's that? Relations. Fun. Okay? Practical. These are all professional development activities that either had the opportunity to observe and research or be part of in terms of facilitating the experience. This is where my interest and where my knowledge base lies, is working within these. And I'm going to talk about now some of the key features of professional development. So what is teacher professional development? For the purposes of today, I'm going to define it as activities and interactions with the potential to increase the knowledge, skills, improve practice, and contribute to growth as a professional. So I'm fairly broadly defining professional development. Professional learning would also be an equal term there. These interactions can be voluntary, they can be mandatory, they can be individual or collaborative, formal or informal. And it's sometimes these informal interactions that I think we don't always acknowledge in terms of being a professional learning experience. Unfortunately, within traditional professional development, teachers are treated as passive learners and recipients of knowledge rather than creating that knowledge themselves. Here's a quote, one of my favorite quotes, from a secondary teacher who said, "I learned more at lunchtime than I did during the sessions." That made absolute perfect sense because the people I was speaking to at lunchtime were my colleagues who were in the same situation as myself. It, PD, was just not servicing my needs. Okay? Marie and I had a good conversation today about the origins of this quote. So within traditional professional development, again, much of my experience is from the professional development I've seen within the United States. Routinely, it lacks necessary support and resources. It takes on a one-size-fits-all experience, meaning that it's not unique to the individuals in which are engaging in it. It tends to be the same for every group. And what Armour and Yelling say, it tends to be done to teachers rather than with them. Lastly, it often falls short of making a lasting impact. So what I want to focus on today is a bit more of a reimagination of professional development. Okay? Putnam and Borko some time ago really identified 4 essential mantras or truisms of effective professional development, and I really connected with these. In particular, they said teachers should be treated as active learners who construct their own understanding. Teachers should be empowered and treated as professionals, and I'll talk a bit more about what it means to be empowered. Teacher education must be situated in classroom practice. It has to be real. It has to be meaningful to the individuals that are engaging in it. And lastly, teacher educators should treat teachers as they expect teachers to treat students. We talk about a student-centered learning environment. We talk about wanting our students to be critical thinkers. There's no reason that it shouldn't be the same for teachers. I'm not going to talk a lot about 3, but there have been 2 main theories that have really informed my work and my research in this area. And that is social learning theory, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, LeVay and Winger, and their notion of a community of practice. That's going to come up in the results that I share. They really view learning as a social process which takes place as individuals participate in a community. This can be a very powerful learning opportunity for teachers. Second, constructivist learning theory, which also values the social nature of learning, provides learners with opportunities, incentives to build knowledge rather than simply dispense knowledge. So those are the 2 main theories that have informed my work. As I talk about my work, most of my work has been collaborative, and so I have to acknowledge a lot of what I've done. Certainly Missy Parker and I have collaborated on, and more recently Deborah Tannehill and Ann McPhail. So it's certainly not my own work, but within core features that I'd like to present today, trying to sum up what is it that we know about effective professional development. And again, most of what I'm going to share comes from within physical education. So there are 8 key components. Number 1, based on teachers' needs and interests. It's ongoing and sustained. It acknowledges that learning is social. Treats teachers as active learners. Includes learning communities of practice. Enhances teacher skills and knowledge, focuses on learning outcomes for students, and is facilitated with care. I want to be cautious that I'm not providing a recipe for effective professional development. I really just want to identify some of the core features. It's not that linear. It's much more complex than that, but I'm just going to identify some of the majors. So I'd like to start with effective PD is based on teachers' needs and interests. Danny, who's a facilitator, mentions it has to come from the teachers. I cannot go in and say this is what you have to do differently. We have to try to help teachers recognize what they think needs to be done to help kids learn better or to help them feel like physical education better. So what does research on this tell us? Research strongly points to PD needs to be organized around teacher need. In order for it to increase ownership and commitment, it needs to be meaningful. It needs to come from teachers rather than being imposed on them. It acknowledges teachers' prior knowledge and experience. Teachers do not come to PD settings without prior knowledge and experience. That has to be acknowledged. And lastly, PD needs to be delivered in a variety of formats. I'm going to provide a number of examples today, none of which are the same, and every group of teachers that you work with has unique needs and needs to be delivered in a different way. Here's what this might look like in practice to tailor PD to meet the needs and interests of those who you're working with. For example, a COP of urban teachers identify integrating technology to implement health-related fitness as a need. So the teachers get together, they identify this is something that we need. Okay? A tech-savvy member of the group volunteers to provide a hands-on technology session. She hosts it at her school. So during and after, teachers brainstorm how ideas can be implemented in their own schools. The reason that this is meaningful is because it was based on the needs of the teachers. It came from the teachers rather than coming from someone else. Secondly, effective PD is ongoing and sustained, which I think Anne-Marie mentioned. A secondary teacher really reinforces this when she said, knowing that there's going to be another one coming, PD with a similar focus. Like, I find it really supportive, really motivating, and really beneficial. Research in this area has told us that one-shot workshops, though they can provide some useful bits of information, they really don't help teachers to become learners and thinkers. Okay? As Hargraves and Fullen would state, they don't have the power to create professional capital necessary to transform schools. In order to support teachers in this type of change, the change is often associated with educational reform. Effective PD must be ongoing and sustained over time. We have a lot of research that reinforces that now. So what might this look like? Secondary teachers invite a university teacher educator to provide an all-day workshop on curricular models, focusing in particular on sport education. Over the next several months, the teachers implement the model and they invite each other to observe teaching. They actually invite the university faculty member to come and observe and provide support and feedback when needed. Then the teachers come back to their larger group and they share what worked, what didn't work, failures and successes. Ultimately, this cycle continues with other curricular models. So you can see this is an ongoing thing. This is not a one-time, I learn it and then I go try it. The next piece is that effective PD acknowledges that learning is a social process. Based on my little poll at the beginning, I'd say that this is a social group. I also learn better socially and I work better collaboratively than I do by myself. Corrine would agree. It has to be social when talking about leading PD. If you lead with academic crap, that's how they'll look at it, as crap. It has to mean something to them. Their version of active learning is important. The social part, it has to be casual. Formal, I think, is just too scary. So what does research tell us about learning as a social endeavor? We know now that positive, trusting personal and professional relationships are critical. Do teachers like to talk when they get together? Absolutely, they like to talk. Some of it's informal, some of it's formal, talking about their practice. Okay? But we know that that's important. We also know that a socially supportive environment is incredibly important, and the collective learning and the application of that learning takes place within that social environment. Finally, we know that social environments encourage interactive feedback and discussion. So it's not just chit-chat, although that is important. It's also about substantive issues of teaching and learning. So what might this look like? Early in my academic career, I had the opportunity to work with a group of teachers along with Missy Parker, helping some teachers revise a curriculum. We went to a cabin, mountain retreat, a cabin. We brought food with us. We brought drinks. We worked collaboratively. No one really knew each other all that well when we started. Okay? There was a lot of collaborative work. Everyone didn't agree all of the time. But everyone who left that cabin retreat had a stronger bond. They knew each other better on a personal and a professional level. And it was really that learning and productivity was a result of the social process. And I can clearly say that there's still a strong bond among those individuals who went on that retreat. Okay, so we know that the social part is really important. Next, we know that effective PD treats teachers as active learners. Okay, this is not a surprise. Jessie really illustrates this point well when she says, teachers learn best by doing. We can talk to them all day long, but it's really about applying it. They have to be able to apply it, actually try it on their own and go and implement it in their teaching. A lot of times they need to see it. They need to see an example. Teachers then say, okay, let me think about it and let me go and do it. Okay, so we know that this has to be active. It needs to be hands-on. However, how many of you have been to a PD session where you sit in rows and you're talked at? Okay, it's not as active and engaging as it could be. We know that constructing own meaning through collaborative engagement is important. We have research to substantiate that. This could take a variety of forms, but it could be group discussion. It could be hands-on activity sessions, observations, or curricular development. Okay? I had you talk with your partner. That was one way I tried to get this to be somewhat of an active, engaging talk. Lastly, we know that teachers play a central role in learning, and it encourages their active participation. Okay? And when I mean active, it needs to be physically active because teachers like to move, but it also needs to be cognitively active and cognitively engaging. You probably noticed this picture. One of you said active, I think probably in relation to that picture. What might this look like in practice? Pair of secondary teachers collaborate to implement Teaching Games for Understanding unit. They were introduced to it at a conference. They attended a state conference. They learned about it. They participated in a session, but then they wanted to go in and do that on their own to engage on it. The pair collectively actually went and approached their principal and said, we need release time. I want to go and observe someone else see them do it. Okay? We want to co-teach if we can possibly do that. Okay? And they were able to do that. So it was the idea that they actively engaged together on this project that made it successful. That engagement stimulated their focus on improving their own teaching practice, and as a result, more of a focus on student learning. The fifth one, effective PD, includes collaborative opportunities within learning communities. This has been a focus that's been particularly interesting for me, is how do these learning communities really function? An elementary teacher sums it up pretty well, I think. She said, we had professional relationships with the university and between the people in the group. Through our work together, I think our personal relationships also grew, and we became more than just acquaintances and colleagues, not just learners. I truly think that we would count each other as friends. So this is a pretty tight-knit group that consider themselves as a community of practice. We know that there are a lot of positive benefits of engagement in a community of practice. We know that through education literature, and now we know that even more through physical education literature. We know that it extends beyond the classroom and school buildings. We know that these units provide opportunities to learn from and with each other. Incredible to me is the amount of camaraderie and respect that you can see within these communities. Okay? We know that participants are more willing to take risks, reflect on their failures, and share successful programs. It's okay within these groups to say, it didn't work for me, and here's what happened. I failed. But you're relying on others in that group to help you, to support you. So what might that look like? Many of you in here have experiences with communities of practice, but here's an experience that I had. I had the opportunity to meet with a group who had been together for over 9 years. This was a long-lasting group. They had addressed topics like assessment, state standards, student-teacher supervision. They'd done a number of things. But what was particularly powerful to me, you can see this is actually part of the meeting. It was in the facilitator's living room, who was a teacher educator. She invited them over. They had food, they had drink, and they talked about what they were going to do for their next meeting. Really creating personal and professional bond while advocating for quality physical education. These are powerful groups. Their success relies in the community nature of their work and support provided through collaborative engagement. I had a great conversation with Marie today about her community of practice and how powerful an experience that is for her. Next, we know that effective PD enhances teachers' pedagogical skills and content knowledge. Okay, so there is some learning in these areas happening. Morgan, a facilitator, summed it up pretty well when she said, over the years I've learned many teachers wanted to get better but didn't have the opportunity for PD. One of my colleagues was really frustrated with the fact that teachers didn't come up with ideas. My view was, why should we expect them to know what contemporary notions of pedagogy are because they haven't had PD? Asking people to be creative and come up with responses without an appropriate knowledge base is fundamentally flawed. So within effective PD, we know that we need to address some of these things. We also know that PD needs to be content specific. How many of you have been to a session that it wasn't just physical education, it included reading and math and a number of other areas and wasn't as applicable to what you do? Okay? We know that we need to engage teachers with both curriculum and pedagogy in areas such as teaching, assessment, observation, and reflection. We know that also that it needs to be meaningful. Okay? If we're engaging in areas of this that don't meet the needs of the teachers and it's not applicable to them and their schools and their students, it's not going to be meaningful. Okay? In particular, we need to engage in content that offer their students and how and why that content is organized and delivered. Okay? So what might this look like in practice? This is actually a picture of Missy. We had the opportunity to go and work with some teachers in Indonesia, and so we were working with them, both teachers and teacher educators, and that happens to be a picture of that. But my example is A group of cooperating teachers and university faculty formed to enhance student teaching experience of the university's PEAT program. Both groups realized they weren't meeting the needs of their student teachers. So they engaged in some dialogue about the pedagogy and content that was necessary to become successful in the student teaching experience. And the teachers actually created their own assessment instrument to help with the evaluation of student teachers. So what that did is it engaged them and the university faculty in a discussion about pedagogical skills, content knowledge, and ultimately they created a discourse about those topics and a common language about those topics. Number 7, I'm almost there. Effective PD focuses on improving learning outcomes for students. Okay, we know that ultimately we'd love for students to be benefiting as a result of this PD. Corrine says it really well. I think it goes back to student learning or student experiences and making sure it's positive. To me, that's how we know if PD is working. Okay? PD is fine and good, but if it doesn't ultimately benefit the students that we teach, it really isn't meeting its purpose. ISEP acknowledges both teacher and student learning needs to be a result of effective professional development. But too often, in my experience, PD seems to be surrounded by a new piece of equipment or a new idea without as much input in terms of what students are really going to get out of this experience. Gusky and his colleague identify that we're really in short supply of this type of research that really connects closely what teachers learn in their professional development and the actual benefit for their students. Physical education is in that same place. I really think this is an area that we need to explore in the future. So here's an example. With the same group of elementary teachers I mentioned before, they collaborate to revise their district curriculum. Their curriculum was not good in its current state, and it wasn't meeting their needs. Not sure many of them had even read it before. It didn't align with state standards. It didn't align with national standards. They tossed it out and they started over. But when they did it, they started with, and this is actually a picture of one of their kids in their classes, they started with students in mind in terms of, let's make this curriculum so that it affects student learning positively. So they did revise their document. They're pretty proud of that document. And what it did for them is it provided further PD for them because they learned how to effectively implement that curriculum. But it also resulted in student learning. They saw the benefits in their kids. The last one, in an area that I've been particularly interested in with my work recently, is the idea that professional development is facilitated with care. When I talk about facilitation, it could be either internal or external leadership in some way. Okay, so what is driving professional development? Secondary teacher said this really well. She said, you've seen them, the two facilitators. They work so well together. I think we just have a really good team, and they have enough skill and experience of dealing with adults to be able to gently push when gentle pushing was needed and pull back when pulling back was needed. Missy and I have looked a lot at facilitation and observed a lot of facilitators. They make it look easy when they do it well. Okay? And some of the things that they do is that they help teachers actively construct new meaning. They do it in a non-judgmental and social environment. It's an environment where teachers are able to identify and acknowledge, hey, I don't know something, and that's okay. Okay? They're able to do that providing structure without dictating. And this is the really interesting part, is their pedagogy of facilitation and how they go about it is very hands-off, but guiding and directing. So one term that we've identified is this idea of providing structure without dictating it, or actually teaching without telling. None of these individuals tell teachers what they have to do. They know that that's not going to be effective. So here's an example. I was able to observe a community of practice as they were figuring out what they wanted to do in terms of a presentation at a state conference. Every year they presented at a state conference. So they were brainstorming. The teachers really weren't sure what they wanted to do. So I watched this facilitator, who was a university teacher educator, ask questions. She prompted, but the teachers made all the decisions. And it took a long time for the teachers to get to the point where they identified assessment as a topic that they wanted to pursue. I further then observed the facilitator say, she could have easily said, this is what you should present on. Instead, she said, what do you think teachers would like to know most about assessment? What is the most difficult part of implementing assessment? And that guided the teachers to identifying what they really wanted to present. Okay? It was pretty incredible to watch. So with all of those guideposts, and again, I want to acknowledge that PD is complex. It is not linear at all, but as many of those different guideposts that we can accommodate, the more likely for success is what the research in the area is telling us. So there's three main things that could be achieved by this type of PD. There's certainly more, but the three I want to focus on today is these teachers are empowered, who are professionals and leaders, they're knowledgeable and effective, and they're teachers who are lifelong learners. Just spend a few moments on each of those. So empowered teachers, they believe in their own competence, okay, to reach the needs and interests of their students. They believe they have something important to say. They're able to vocalize their needs and have a meaningful voice in the content of PD. These are teachers who are able to stand up and say, no, that's not going to work here. We've got to go about this in a different way, and they're not afraid to share that voice. They're serious about their responsibility, and they position themselves to challenge assumptions of educational change efforts. These are the teachers who are making changes rather than reacting to changes. Here's an example. Morgan, a facilitator, shares. It's about getting them, teachers, to know and feel confident. They have actual expertise. One person's strength is another person's weakness. Getting them to move out of teaching within four walls to teaching as a collaborative activity. It's actually an image of Lizzie, a teacher I've had the opportunity to work with, and she's presenting at a national conference in the United States. She entered this idea of presenting. She was very concerned. She was very nervous about it. She didn't feel like she had anything important to say. But as a result of this presentation, she transformed as a teacher. She realized that what she had to say was important and people listened to her. And it was a pretty incredible day to watch her do that. The next is that knowledgeable and effective teachers are the result of effective professional development. We know that these teachers use appropriate, developmentally and instructionally appropriate practices. They're knowledgeable. They effectively engage their students. They're able to find ways to engage the students in which they work with. Lastly, we know that assisting teachers become change agents in schools is not an easy task. We have some folks in this room have indicated that maybe this needs to happen in initial teacher education. And I know that's something that I deal with in my own teaching within teacher education. Is how do we get beginning teachers to be change agents? How do we get them to do things differently? Lastly, and it's something I think maybe as important as any, is that effective PD results in teachers who are lifelong learners. Okay? These are individuals who view themselves as learners, or in some literature we talk about this notion of capacity building. Okay? These teachers seek experiences that encourage them to ask questions, make mistakes, and help them to discriminate what is important to know and do. We want these teachers who are going to continue to ask the questions, continue to seek additional information. Okay? Here's a picture. I warned you about pictures. Chris, the facilitator, really sums this up. She said, my job is to help teachers either rediscover it or rethink it differently, or to begin to develop an understanding that knowing is an ongoing thing for them. Okay? This idea that I continually need to learn. Okay? Yes, I have degrees and I've been to school, but I can still learn. I still know. The more, you've heard the notion of the more I learn, the more I know I need to learn. Okay? These teachers feel that way as well. They're always seeking opportunities. So, some conclusions to sum that up. Okay? We know that much of PD offered to teachers really has not worked. It has not necessarily met their needs. And again, I'm speaking of the United States because I have seen some really positive things here in Ireland. But those one-off workshops, we know that they're really not meeting the needs of teachers. So it lends to the question, are we continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results? Okay, if we continue with those, is it really going to result in something differently? And I would say that it's not. So in order for PD to have an impact, we really need some systematic efforts to disseminate characteristics of effective PD. And I'd love to hear the input of you all on how do we do that? How do we get this information in the hands of policymakers who are making the decisions about professional development? Who gets it and when? Getting it in the hands of principals and administrators who are often the gatekeepers in terms of professional development. Okay? The guideposts I presented here are one effort towards that end. Thank you. How did I do?
Quickly. We're there for 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you.